I don't care what that uniform means, you are obstructing an officer. Give me your identification now. I am a federal air marshal. This is Ailkid operation. I advise you to back away.
Officer Silas Thorne, a 47-year-old veteran of the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport Security Division, was stationed near the main departure terminal entrance at exactly 7:42 a.m. Among his colleagues, Thorne was known as a straight shooter, in the precise, bloodless language of internal affairs. However, this was shorthand for an officer with a 14-year personnel file containing 31 buried complaints regarding racial profiling, 9 formal warnings, and a pattern of escalation that his supervisors had chosen, repeatedly, to ignore. On this particular Tuesday morning, Thorne was restless. He was scanning the terminal for a reason to remind someone who was in charge, and he found in the form of a black man moving through the departure hall wearing the full dress uniform of a United States Air Marshal General. Pressed on a knife's edge, metal stacked 4 rows deep, a classified briefcase locked, biometrically, to his left wrist. In that single, irreversible moment, Officer Silas Thorne made a judgment call that would cost him his pension, his freedom, and his name. He decided the uniform was cosplay. He decided the medals were ordered online. He decided the briefcase was contraband. And looking at the man's calm, unreadable stillness, that absolute, combat-forged composure, he decided that the silence was defiance. He decided he needed to act. He was wrong on every count. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let me know in the comment where you are watching from tonight. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, because what unfolds over the next several minutes will leave you speechless. Trust me, you wouldn't want to miss it. Thorne had a system. 14 years at Hartsfield-Jackson had given him that much. A finely tuned instinct, he called it, for reading a terminal the way a fisherman reads water. He knew the nervous first-time flyers from the seasoned business travelers. He knew the college kids running late from the retirees, moving slow. He knew, or believed he knew, exactly what threat looked like, what innocence looked like, and everything in between. He had built this certainty over a decade and a half of mornings, just like this one, and it had never once occurred to him that the system was broken, because the system had never once been challenged. Not seriously, not in a way that stuck. He was leaning against the far pillar near gate C12, coffee going cold in his hand, when he saw him. The man entered the departure hall from the south corridor, and even from 40 feet away, Thorne felt it, that small, bristling irritation he had learned, over the years, to dress up as professional instinct. The man was tall, broad across the shoulders, moving with the kind of unhurried, ground-eating stride that didn't belong to someone rushing for a flight. His dress uniform was immaculate, deep navy, gold buttons catching the terminal fluorescence, 4 rows of service medals arranged with the precision of a man who had earned every single one and knew exactly what they meant. A black leather briefcase hung from his left hand, and something about the way he carried it, close to his body, wrists slightly angled inward, snagged in Thorne's mind like a burr. Too composed, Thorne thought. Too deliberate. He watched the man for 11 seconds before he reached for his radio. Miller. His voice was casual, the way a man sounds when he's already made a decision and is simply narrating it. Got one coming up through C corridor. Black male, full military dress, carrying a case. Looks off. I'm going to do a welfare check. On the other end, Miller's response was careful. Copy. You want me to. Just stay close. Thorne clipped the radio back to his belt and pushed off the pillar. General Marcus Stone had known, before he was 20 steps into the terminal, that someone was watching him. It wasn't instinct exactly. It was experience, which is a different and heavier thing. He had been a black man in uniform for 31 years. He had walked through airports in 4 countries, through government buildings in 11 states, through rooms where every face turned when he entered, and not always in the way that rank alone could explain. He had learned, early and at cost, to read the particular quality of attention that was not curiosity, but calculation. The way a gaze sharpens, the way a body shifts from passive to purposeful. He caught Thorne's eyes from 40 feet out and felt the familiar, exhausting weight of recognition settle across his shoulders like a second uniform. He was already 7 minutes behind. His handler, a voice he knew only as Calloway, was waiting for a check-in signal that Stone was supposed to have transmitted 12 minutes ago. The operation was live. 2 years of groundwork, 17 undercover assets, in a target window that closed in less than 4 hours. Every minute Stone spent in this terminal was a minute the uplink sat silent, and a silent uplink made people nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. He did not have time for this. But he had been here before. Not this terminal, not this officer, but this moment, this particular flavor of being seen as something less than what he was. And he knew, with the cold clarity of long practice, that the only variable he could control was himself. He could not control what Thorne saw when he looked at him. He could not control what Thorne had decided before he'd taken a single step. What he could control was this. He slowed his pace. Slightly. Deliberately. He shifted the briefcase, so both hands were visible at his sides. His right hand open, his left wrist turned just enough to keep the biometric lock clear of any accidental contact. He kept his chin level, his expression neutral. The particular kind of neutral that is not absence of feeling, but absolute mastery of it. 30 years of military discipline compressed into the set of a jaw and the steadiness of a gaze. He would not reach for his credentials first. That was not weakness. That was protocol. You did not volunteer information to a man who had already decided you were guilty. You waited. You gave him the rope, and you let him choose what to do with it. His clenched fist, held low at his right side, was the only thing in his body he could not entirely flatten. It was not anger. It was something older and more structural than anger. The particular tension of a man who has absorbed too many of these moments to be surprised by them anymore, but has never, not once, been able to make them not matter. Thorne closed the distance between them in 15 steps. He didn't announce himself. He didn't reach for his badge. He simply planted himself in Stone's path, shoulders squared, chin slightly forward, the body language of a man who had decided the geography of this conversation before it began, and said, with the bored authority of someone who expected compliance as a matter of course, "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop right there." The terminal kept moving around them. Luggage wheels clattered. A gate announcement echoed overhead. Somewhere behind Stone, a phone screen tilted upward, and General Marcus Stone stopped, looked at the man in front of him, and said nothing, because he had learned, a long time ago, that silence was not surrender. Sometimes silence was simply the last warning a man ever received. Stone did not reach into his jacket immediately. He held Thorne's gaze for exactly 2 seconds, not as a challenge, but as an assessment. He was reading the man the way he had once read foreign intelligence reports, quickly, completely, looking for the detail that told you everything you needed to know. What he found in Thorne's face was not suspicion exactly. It was something more entrenched than that. It was a conclusion that had been reached before the conversation started, and was now simply waiting for the conversation to confirm it. He reached into his inside breast pocket with 2 fingers, slowly, keeping his movements visible and deliberate, and produced his credentials. The card was federal issue, laminated, government embossed, bearing his photograph, his full name, his rank, and the seal of the Transportation Security Administration's Air Marshal Service. It was, in every legal and institutional sense, unmistakable. Stone held it out between 2 fingers, level and unhurried, the way a man presents something he has presented many times before and expects, every single time, to be the end of the conversation. Thorne took it, turned it over, looked at the front, looked at the back, turned it over again. The gesture lasted 4 seconds and communicated everything. He handled it the way a man handles a menu at a restaurant he has already decided is overpriced, not reading it so much as performing the act of reading it, the conclusion already fixed, the motion purely theatrical. Then he held it back out between 2 fingers, the mirror image of how Stone had offered it, and said, "I'm still going to need you to open the case." Stone took the credentials back, pocketed them. "That case," he said, his voice even and unhurried, the tone of a man explaining something technical to someone he is choosing to be patient with, "is a classified federal asset secured with a biometric lock registered to my person. Opening it on an unauthorized verbal command triggers an automatic breach protocol. I'm not able to open it in a public terminal. I am not authorized to open it on your instruction, and you are not authorized to ask." He paused. Then, with the same measured calm, "I'd recommend you let me continue to my gate." What Stone said was precise, accurate, and, to any person listening with basic comprehension, entirely clear. What Thorne heard was different. What Thorne heard, underneath the calm and the credentials and the technical language, was resistance, evasion, the specific register of someone who believed the rules applied to them differently. The briefcase had a lock that couldn't be opened. The credentials couldn't be questioned. The man couldn't be stopped. Every answer was a wall. And to Thorne, walls meant something was being protected, and things being protected meant guilt. "Sir," Thorne said, and the word carried no courtesy, "I'm not asking." Miller had been standing 3 steps back, slightly to the left, doing what junior officers learn to do in the presence of a senior with a temper, occupying the space between present and invisible. But when Stone had produced the credentials, Miller had leaned in. Not dramatically, just the slight forward tilt of a man reading something he wants to make sure he's read correctly. He had read it correctly. He knew the seal. He knew the format. He had done the federal liaison training 18 months ago, the 2-day seminar nobody wanted to attend, and everybody forgot until a moment exactly like this one made it suddenly, acutely relevant. The card Stone was holding was not a printout. It was not a prop. It was the real thing, and the man holding it was, by every legal definition Miller had been trained to recognize, a federal officer whose authority in this terminal superseded Thorne's by several institutional floors. He opened his mouth. Silas. Miller. Thorne didn't look at him. Just the name, flat and final like a door closing. Miller closed his mouth, looked at the back of Thorne's head, looked at Stone. Stone's eyes moved to him for precisely 1 second. Not pleading, not accusing, just registering, and then returned to Thorne. Miller took a half step back and said nothing. He would spend a long time, afterward, accounting for that half step. 12 feet away, Dominic had stopped walking. He was a project manager from Charlotte, in Atlanta for a quarterly review, running slightly early for once in his professional life, which was the only reason he was standing in this particular section of terminal at this particular moment with his phone in his hand from having just checked his boarding time. He was not an activist. He was not looking for anything. He was simply a man who had glanced up at the wrong moment and found himself watching something that made the back of his neck go cold. He raised his phone, quietly, the way you do when you're not entirely sure what you're looking at, but some part of you already knows it matters. The terminal had begun to change texture around the 3 men. It happened the way weather changes, gradually, then all at once. A woman pulling a roller bag slowed, then stopped, her hand tightening on the handle. A teenage boy nudged his father's arm. A child, maybe 5 years old, looked up at her mother and reached for her hand without entirely knowing why, responding to something in the quality of the adult silence that children register before they can name it. And, in the center of it, General Marcus Stone stood without moving. His jaw was set. His shoulders were level. His left hand held the briefcase with the practiced stillness of a man who understood, with total physical clarity, exactly how much was riding on not moving. His right hand hung at his side, fist closed, not raised, not threatening, simply closed, the way a fist closes when a man has decided that the only thing left he controls is whether he gives the person in front of him the satisfaction of watching him break. He was not going to break, but he could see, in Thorne's eyes, that the decision had already been made. The credentials had not registered. The explanation had not landed. The warning had not been received. The man in front of him was not going to stop, and there was nothing left to do but let him make the mistake. It happened fast, the way disasters always do, not with the slow, cinematic build that the preceding tension seemed to promise, but in a single lurch, one decision crossing the line from thought into action before anything could stop it. Thorne reached out and grabbed Stone's arm. His gloved hand closed around Stone's left forearm, the briefcase arm, fingers wrapping the sleeve of the dress uniform with the casual, proprietary force of a man who had grabbed people in terminals for 14 years and never once been made to answer for it. It was not a careful grip. It was not measured. It was the grip of a man exercising what he believed to be an uncomplicated right, and it lasted exactly as long as it took for the world to prove him wrong. The biometric sensor registered the contact in 0.3 seconds. It didn't announce itself. There was no alarm, no visible light, no sound that the terminal crowd could hear. There was simply a pulse, one single encrypted signal, transmitted silently through the wrist link to a receiver nobody in that terminal knew existed, and then the uplink went dark. Not degraded, not interrupted, Dark. The kind of dark that is a full stop, not a pause. The kind that triggers automatic escalation in federal systems designed specifically to assume the worst when a signal like this one goes silent. 400 miles away, in an operations center whose location is not on any public record, 3 monitors went black in the same second. A fourth displayed a single line of red text. A woman in her 40s, headset on, coffee untouched, looked at the screens and felt her stomach drop with the specific, practiced dread of someone who is trained for this scenario and hoped never to use that training. She pressed the channel open and said, with absolute, deliberate calm, "We've lost Stone. Initiate code, Amber." Around her, the room began to move. In the terminal, none of that was visible. What was visible was this. Stone looked down at the hand on his arm. Not with fear, not with anger, with the particular, exhausted recognition of a man who had given every available warning and watched each one be ignored. He had 1 second, maybe less, in which to make a decision that would be reviewed, analyzed, and argued over in federal proceedings for the next 2 years. He made it correctly, with the precise, calibrated force of a man trained in 14 forms of hand-to-hand combat across 3 decades of active service. Stone reached across with his right hand, found Thorne's wrist, and removed it from his arm. Not violently, not with the explosive speed he was capable of, which would have been a different story entirely. He simply relocated Thorne's hand, the way you move an object that has been placed somewhere does not belong, and stepped back 1 full pace, creating distance, taking himself out of contact range, giving Thorne every possible opportunity to stop. Then he looked at Thorne directly, and in a voice calibrated to carry, not loud, not shouted, but projected with the practiced authority of a man who had commanded rooms of 200, he said, "You have made a federal error." 6 words. No performance in them. No threat. No heat. No satisfaction. Just the flat, declarative weight of fact, spoken by someone who understood exactly what those words meant and exactly what was now already in motion because of them. The terminal was silent. Not quieter. Silent. The particular silence of a public space when something happens that everyone present understands, on some instinctive level, is not ordinary. Luggage wheels had stopped. Conversations had stopped. The ambient noise of an international departure hall, which is considerable, constant, and almost never interrupted, had simply ceased, as though the building itself had paused to observe. Dominic's phone was recording. So was the phone of the woman in the blue jacket behind Stone. So was the phone of the teenager by the gate pillar who had nudged his father 30 seconds ago. So were 4 other phones that nobody would inventory until federal investigators pulled the terminal footage the following morning and found, in total, 9 independent recordings of what happened next. What happened next was that Thorne, his face a color that had moved past red into something harder and less readable, reached for Stone again. He could not have explained the decision. He could not, in any of the depositions that followed, produce a coherent account of what he believed he was doing or what outcome he expected. The crowd was watching. The cameras were rolling. 6 words had just been spoken in a voice that half the terminal had heard, and the rational response, the survivable response, was to stop, to recalibrate, to find, somewhere in 14 years of institutional training, the procedure for a moment when you have misread a situation this badly and need to find a way back. He reached for Stone anyway, and Miller moved. Not quickly enough. Nothing Miller did in those seconds was quick enough to undo what had already been done. But he moved, finally and irrevocably, stepping forward and placing himself in the space between Thorne's outstretched arm and Stone's uniform, his own hand coming up to intercept Thorne's reach, his voice coming out lower and more urgent than he intended. "Silas, stop. Stop right now." Thorne's arm halted against Miller's. His eyes moved to his partner. Something in Miller's expression, not defiance, but a kind of pale, clear-eyed certainty, the face of a man who has just made a decision he will not walk back, landed on Thorne like cold water. He stopped. The operation was already gone. The uplink had been dark for 11 seconds, which was 11 seconds longer than the federal threshold for code amber activation, which meant the machinery was already moving, the calls were already being made, and nothing that happened in this terminal for the remainder of the morning would change any of that. But Miller was standing between them, and that, in the end, would be the only thing that separated his future from Thorne's. The first thing Thorne noticed about Special Agent Elias Sterling was that he didn't hurry. He appeared at the terminal entrance at 8:05 a.m., 23 minutes after the uplink went dark, moving through the departure hall with the unhurried, ground-covering stride of a man who understood that urgency and speed were not the same thing. He was not in tactical gear. He was not flanked by a team. He was a trim man in a dark suit carrying nothing but a credentials wallet and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent careers in rooms where the wrong energy destroys everything. He didn't announce himself to the crowd. He didn't reach for his badge at a distance. He simply located Thorne, still standing near gate C-12. Miller 2 steps away, Stone seated on a bench at the far wall with his briefcase across his knees and his hands folded over it with the patience of a man who has made his report and is now waiting for the institution to catch up and walk directly to him. He placed one hand on Thorne's shoulder, lightly, almost gently. "Come with me," he said. That was all. No introduction, no escalation, no performance of authority, because men like Sterling had learned long ago that real authority doesn't perform. It simply arrives, and the room reorganizes itself accordingly. Thorne looked at the hand on his shoulder, looked at Sterling's face, and something in him, some remaining current of resistance, went out like a light. He went. Miller watched them go, and then stood very still for a moment in the middle of the terminal, the crowd slowly resuming its motion around him, and understood with sudden, vertiginous clarity that the next conversation he had would determine the rest of his career. The debrief happened in a secured room in the airport's administrative wing that most of the security staff didn't know existed. It was not a comfortable room. It was not designed to be. Sterling sat across from Thorne with a tablet, a recorder, and an expression of such complete professional neutrality that Thorne, who had sat across from internal affairs investigators twice before and walked away both times, felt the difference immediately. Those had been departmental proceedings. This was not departmental. This had a different gravity, entirely. Miller's body camera had captured everything. This was established in the first 4 minutes of the debrief, quietly and without drama, when Sterling placed a tablet on the table and pressed play without preamble. Thorne watched himself cross the terminal, watched himself take Stone's credentials and turn them over with the studied indifference of a man declining to read what he's been handed, watched himself reach out and take hold of a federal officer's arm in full view of a public terminal and 9 recording devices. The footage was clear. The audio was clearer. It was the audio that finished him. The body camera's buffer, a 40-second rolling recording that captures sound before the camera is manually activated, a feature Thorne had never once in 14 years considered might apply to him, had preserved the radio exchange. His own voice, unhurried and certain, coming through the speaker in the small room with a fidelity that left nothing open to interpretation. Some black guy, playing dress-up. 7 words spoken into a radio before he had taken a single step toward Stone, before the confrontation had begun, before there was any action to evaluate or justify. 7 words that collapsed, in one audio clip, every possible argument about reasonable suspicion, professional judgment, or good faith error. Sterling stopped the recording, made a note, said nothing. Sergeant Angela Vance had watched the body cam footage from her office, alone, approximately 19 minutes after the incident, having been flagged by the system's automatic supervisor notification. She watched it once all the way through. Then she picked up her phone and called the department's legal team. Not the union, not her precinct commander, not Thorne. The legal team. She gave them a factual account of what she had seen, noted that her name did not appear in the incident report because she had not been present, and asked, in the careful and precise language of a woman protecting a career she had spent 21 years building, to have that absence formally documented. She was off the phone in 6 minutes. She did not call Thorne that day, or any day that followed. Sloan Whitaker, the union representative, arrived at the administrative wing at 9:40 a.m. with the practiced confidence of a man who had extracted officers from serious situations before and believed this would be another one. He asked to review the evidence before committing to a position. Sterling provided it without objection. Whitaker watched the footage, listened to the audio, reviewed the preliminary federal charge summary that had been transmitted from the operations center 40 minutes earlier. He sat with it for a moment, and then he took out his phone, stepped into the hallway, and made one call to the union's senior counsel. The call lasted 90 seconds. When he came back into the room, he did not sit down. "We can't touch this one," he said, and left. Julian from Internal Affairs arrived last and stayed longest. He didn't need the body cam footage, though he watched it. What he needed was already in the file he had pulled within minutes of receiving the federal notification. A file that was, by any honest accounting, a document of institutional failures so comprehensive it was almost architectural. 14 years. 31 complaints. 9 formal warnings. A pattern so consistent and so thoroughly buried by a succession of supervisors who had chosen convenience over accountability that it read less like a personnel record and more like a confession. Every complaint, every warning, every incident report that had been softened, shelved, or simply made to disappear. All of it would now be entered, in full, as federal evidence. All of it would now be read by people who had not buried it and had no interest in doing so. Thorne spent that night in federal holding. He was not yet in handcuffs when they brought him in. That would come. But the door locked behind him with a sound that was different from any door he had heard before, and he sat in the institutional quiet and tried to construct, from the wreckage of the day, some version of events in which what had happened was recoverable. He was still trying when the lights went out,